That's very interesting. You know, as a practitioner, there's always been a requirement for lawyers to retain files either 5 years or 7 years. And there's always been a challenge what happens after those 7 years. Does the Act clarify the situation? When you've ceased acting for a client, how long should the file remain protected?
So the Act says that, after you've retained it for as long as lawfully or legally possible,
Which is?
It depends on the legislation. Like I said, if the information is pertaining to your FIA or it's pertaining to tax, you're looking at that legislation, because different legislation would say...
Because you'd normally have finished with that client.
Yeah, if you're finished with that client, then it's either one, you contact that client to say, do you want copies of your information? Or if you don't want copies of your information, we delete your information, and you make sure that you delete it. So that says you can delete that information. Just inform your client that you deleted the information.
Are you not required to keep it for a certain length of time?
No, unless there's a legislation that requires you to.
Yeah. Dumelang, hello, welcome to another episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom. As always, we've got yet another powerful entrepreneur, business person, in this case an attorney, who is a partner at Akil Janabay Attorneys, Lebogang George. She'll introduce herself in greater detail momentarily. For now, let me just ask you please to strike that subscribe button. I know that we're sounding like a broken record, we keep asking you, but it's very, very important for purpose of the algorithms, for purpose of staying up with, being able to keep up with this particular medium, that you strike that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, along with the like button. Please, we need it. A bit of housekeeping. My book, it shows from another angle there. You can see it, called Nuggets of Grit. Please come to Mogobe Plaza, first floor, and we'll get yourself a copy for only $350. Alternatively, you go to Airport Junction, you'll get us a copy. Support us, guys. We need to keep things going, and this is one way that you support us. And thank you for watching, and welcome, Lebogang George.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's a privilege for us that you've been able to make it.
It's a privilege that you invited me to be here.
Absolutely. Let's start off with just you setting out your background, sharing your condensed CV. Tell us about yourself. Who is Lebogang George?
Well, Lebogang George is an attorney. She was born and raised in Tlokeng. And she actually studied in South Africa, and she spent majority of her time in South Africa, 15 years to be exact, in South Africa. Studying at the time, corporate commercial wasn't a big thing in Botswana, so that's the reason why I thought, you know what, let me go and try out this new thing that is not really a big thing in Botswana. Let me see what is there and how I can equip myself and come back. And that's when I started learning about other types of law, your technology law, your cybersecurity law, your data protection law. Then I just got interested in it, and I delved into it, and the rest is history.
Wow. Why did you choose that line of practice?
To be honest, I didn't choose it. I know a lot of people like to say things chose them, but there was literally a client who asked about it and said, listen, there's this new beast that's in Europe, and we anticipate that you're obviously going to have it in South Africa. At the time I was in South Africa, and they were asking about it and saying, what are you doing with data? What are you doing with people's personal information? And asking all of those questions. So we thought, you know what, we're not going to say to them, we don't know. We're just going to start reading behind closed doors and act like we know what we're talking about. And that's how, and it started with me, because then my partner was saying, listen, Lebo, you are going to be the one learning, and then we'll learn from you. So that's how it started. Then I just started reading about the general data protection regulation, the Europe one, and then I started learning about the South African one.
Okay. Now, could you just tell us which law firms you practiced at, and share a little bit of the actual legal work that you've done?
So the law firm was a small law firm, DM5 Incorporated. At the time, it was all-female law firm, and black people in South Africa were not known for corporate commercial. So that was the reason why I chose it, because it was a different kind of law firm where everybody expects those big law firms that are run by majority the white counterparts to know corporate commercial law. So I was interested to see, what do these ladies know, and how come they were brave enough to be in the heart of Sandton, competing with these giants and these mammoth firms, and doing essentially what's known as their thing. So I joined them, and then that's how I started learning about corporate commercial law, and I started getting into the other facets of the corporate commercial space.
And was there litigation involved?
I had to do litigation for 1 year. So 1 year when I was a candidate attorney, my articles, I had to do litigation. So I did a bit of corporate commercial litigation. I did civil litigation for a year. Then after that, when we rotated and I went to the corporate commercial side, I decided this is where I want to stay, because then you have a choice after your 2 years if you want to go to litigation or you want to stay. So I decided that I want to stay.
Okay. And how did you wind up at Akil Jinabai?
So I had a data protection conference last year. And they were also interested, and they attended the conference. We started having conversations, and they were saying, listen, we are interested. We know that there's a Data Protection Act, and we see that there's a buzz in this thing. People are trying to ride this wave of data protection, and there are few people in the country that are specializing in this. We want a piece of that. Would you like to come and hear us out? And I'm like, I'm not sure if I really want to be full-time employed and be in a law firm at the moment. I think I'm good consulting and doing this on my own. And they were like, no, but hear us out. You
had already left that firm.
I had already left that firm, and I decided to just be independent and be an entrepreneur and try out this thing on my own, because I could see that I can do it on my own now. I had the experience. I had been there for more than 10 years, and I've been practicing. So then I listened to them, and we came to an agreement. I said, okay, I guess this will work. I guess this partnership will work. Let's do it. Let's see, and let's get a piece of that pie.
Yeah. Just talk to me like you're talking to a man in the streets, totally clueless.
Okay.
What is data protection? Before we talk about the act, we need to know the animal.
So your information, your name, your banking details, your account number, your kids' details, your kid's birth certificate. So anything that links you to something where somebody can identify and say, this is you. This is Lebogang. That's your personal information. Your omang is your personal information. Your passport is your personal information. It contains your details. It contains personal details about you. That is personal information. And we know that people sell that information for money. So personal information is just anything that can identify you. Even your car registration, if I can identify and say that's your car registration number, that's your personal information. Your physical address at home, personal information.
Does it include brand identity?
So it doesn't include brand identity. So that's the difference now between us and with Europe. Because with Europe, when you're talking about personal information or personal data, it has to do with a company. It includes a company's brand identity and corporate identity. Whereas with ours now, it's just an individual. Anything that relates to an individual, nothing to do with a company.
And is there separate consideration when it comes to a company? Because you might have a situation like in my case where Mogobe Incorporated overlaps with Mompoloki, Lerumo, Mogobe.
So for it has to be personal, and it has to do with an individual. So if it can be identified to you as an individual, then that's personal information. If it strictly has to do with a company, then that's out of the scope of the act.
And where is this data to be found?
this data, I mean, we transact and we deal with data and exchange information all the time. You know, you exchange information with your bank, you exchange information with your employees, they exchange information with you exchange information with service providers, and when you are streaming online, you're exchanging information with those streaming services. When you're watching movies, you're exchanging your details, you're exchanging your bank details, your surname, your location. So every day we're exchanging data. When you're walking into people's offices, you sign in. They ask you, sign in, put in your omang, put in your phone number. That is personal data. Every single day, when you walk out of your house, you're exchanging personal information. Now we have surveillances. They're taking pictures of us. That is our personal information. They're taking videos of us. That's personal information.
Yeah. Who's surveilling us? It's Big Brother is all over, is it?
Big Brother is busy surveilling us, and they're calling it for security reasons. But, you know, they're the ones.
Are these the cameras in the street you're talking about?
These are cameras in the streets. They're taking, I mean, our images are personal information. Yeah, so your images are personal information. Those videos of you crossing the road.
Have we consented to that being taken in exchange for being secure and protected?
So that's the conversation that we need to have. So the fact that this act is here, these are conversations that we need to have. Because obviously when you ask these questions, the people who are taking these videos of us are going to say, but it's for security reasons, you know. But then we also they need to be accountable. Fine, for security reasons, but where do you keep them? How long do you keep them for? And how can we be sure it's for security reasons? So it's good that this legislation is here, but we also need to be knowledgeable so that we can ask the right questions.
Yeah. This is a very fascinating subject. Now, let's talk about the act itself. What triggered the need for the act? What was the what was the itch that was being scratched? Because I normally believe you shouldn't scratch if it doesn't itch.
Absolutely. I think if we know, when we're talking about protection of privacy, it's always been in our constitution. So it's been there in our constitution.
The Bill of Rights.
In the Bill of Rights. It's always been there. It's just that obviously laws are evolving, people are evolving, and we're starting to know really and being aware of our rights. So it's always been there as a concept. It's not something that's new, because people are thinking, oh, this is new, we're taking this. But if you look at the Constitution, it's something that's always been there. Your right to privacy has always been there. This is just something that's more evolved because now, because of social media, because of technology, we freely, really are sharing our information. Our information is being shared across countries, across borders. So the need arose because of technology, and it's the one that was a catalyst of this Data Protection Act that was already there, but we needed to formalize it, and we needed to make sure that it was a proper legislation so that it covers people, especially in this era of technology. Under
which ministry does it fall? In other words, which minister brought it to Parliament and made a case for it?
So the state, the Ministry of State Presidency, it falls under that ministry. So right now that's the custodian. It falls under there, and the commissioner sits under that ministry at the moment. Yes.
And what arguments did they put before Parliament to get Parliament to agree to this law?
The three arguments were, let's protect information here about Botswana, because initially it was supposed to be localizing our data, making sure that our data is at home and that we have control of our data, and very few data is passed to other countries. So it was about, let's protect the data about Botswana because we don't know what people are doing with our data outside. Let's protect the integrity. So it was all about protecting our data and the privacy because we don't know what people are doing with our data.
That's number one.
That was number one. And then I think the second thing was also the fact that people were misusing, even locally, people were misusing data about Botswana, and people were finding them to be subjects, WhatsApp groups where their information is there, their banking details, their pay slips are there. So it was saying we need to make sure what companies and organizations are more accountable. You mean
guys in Forex and whatnot?
Guys in Forex, guys in financial institutions, insurance, all of those organizations, you know. So it was more a thing of let us try to make business accountable, so business can also be ethical, and so that Botswana as well are in control, again, the whole control of their data thing, because there was misuse of data. Even hospitals were misusing data where medical records could be found on social media. So it was more a thing of, we need to control this and we need to be ethical about people's data. And I think also, lastly, as you know, I mean, Botswana does not exist in a vacuum. We interact with other countries, and I think it was more a global call to say, let's adhere to international and global standards as well. If you want to do business outside of Botswana, we need to also show that we care about our information first, and also other people's information, and we don't misuse it.
Wow, it's very, very interesting. What did you say are the key provisions of the Act?
So the key provisions, and I think the most important one, first of all, this gives power to individuals. You have control. It gives you a lot of rights as a data subject. A data subject is an individual who shares their data. So you as an individual have the right to request your data. So if you are going out and you're applying for a bank loan, and then the bank has your information, you do have the right to ask, what type of information do you have? Do you have more than what I've given you? Can I have a copy of that information? And then, can you delete that information? You know, as far as
after you've used
possible,
it,
after you've used it, can you delete it? And if you don't delete it, can I have a reason, a legitimate reason, whether it's a legislation that says you can keep it for this long? I need to know why you're keeping it.
So the Act sets out all those provisions.
It sets out all those provisions, and it says that you as a company need to facilitate and make sure that this person, Lebogang, who's requesting her information, you have the systems and the processes in place to make sure that information, she receives it within a specific time. So those are the rights of an individual. And also just to make sure that you as a company are transparent in how you also collect the information. So you'll say to Lebogang, we're collecting your information for these purposes. We may share your information with another company that's assisting us in our
Does that
services.
have to be spelled out in an email?
That can be spelled out even in your contract. It can be in a contract, it can be in an email, as long as it's clear and as long as it's communicated with the person, so that they know and they are aware that maybe their data is not sitting in Botswana, maybe it's sitting in America, maybe it's sitting in China, so they know. So you need to be transparent when it comes to their data. And it also says that collect as much data as reasonably possible. Don't collect too much data that is unnecessary. So if somebody is there for a loan, collect specifically for that purpose. They're getting a loan. Don't ask anything outside of that loan. Don't ask about their sexual orientation. What does that have to do with getting a loan?
All right. But you can ask whether they're married in or out of community.
Of course, because that's in relation, because you're probably going to then have to get consent from their spouse, for that loan. So ask what is specific to the purpose. So it should be specific to the purpose. Anything outside of that, then you're essentially in breach of the Data Protection Act. So
can the provisions of the Act be enforced criminally?
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Because as a director or as an executive, you have a fiduciary duty to make sure that your company complies with legislation that governs it, right? And if you don't do that, there will be criminal sanctions. There will be imprisonment as well if you're seen that you
Don't say that.
Yes, if you've seen that you were negligent and you deliberately decided that you are not going to comply with the Act. And obviously all of this is not to say that, as soon as you're in breach, then you're going to be imprisoned. But there has to be extreme circumstances. Maybe you are a multiple offender, and you deliberately decided that you're not going to adhere to the Act. Then in those circumstances, then there will be imprisonment, or there can be a fine as well.
Are directors and board members vulnerable? Are they at risk?
They are at risk.
Tell me about that.
Because those are the people that are custodians of good corporate governance. Even when we're talking about the Companies Act, whenever something happens with a company where it was found that directors were negligent and they did not exercise their fiduciary duties, criminally they are liable. So as with this act, if you are seen that you decided that you are not going to adhere to a legislation and you're going to be negligent when it comes to someone's personal information, then you will be held criminally liable if they found that you were extremely negligent and you're a multiple offender, because you are the custodian of corporate governance.
Is that fair for external board members? Is that not going to terrify board members who are being invited in?
I think
if the risk if they're exposed to that particular risk.
I think like with any other, I'll give the Companies Act as an example. So when you're a board member, they're always, you take minutes, they're resolutions, they are minutes, right? And then in those minutes, it's recorded. If there's a dissenting voice, it's recorded that this person did not agree with this. And then the majority, obviously, if you're ever called to a commission or you're ever called to court, then they look at the minutes and they see, were you for the majority and you decided that you're going to flout these provisions? If you are the dissenting voice and you are the one who has said, we need to adhere to this legislation, then you
have an escape route.
Then you have an scapegoat.
Escape route. Assuming that they will give you access to those minutes.
Assuming that they will, but I mean, you have to exercise good corporate governance, and good corporate governance.
You're entitled to the minutes.
This
is very, very interesting to me. How are you educating Botswana about this, and are you in fact doing that?
Yes, in our little corners, because Botswana, we like to say, what is government doing, or what is the commissioner doing, or what are they doing? But I think it's also up to us in our little spaces, in our little corners, to educate, and I try on my social media pages, on my social media platforms, to publish articles about the Data Protection Act, to the implications of it, the obligations, the duties of companies, and the rights of individuals as well. I go on platforms, conferences, I do webinars. I hosted a webinar yesterday talking about compliance, that now we have to comply. The honeymoon phase is over. You have to comply. If you're not complying, you're in breach. So in my little space, I try to educate
They didn't give us time?
No, they kept giving us time. Now they were like, no more. More.
How did that happen?
So this happened on the 14th of January 2025.
That's yesterday. How much time have we been given?
We've been given since, basically since 2018, really. It came into effect in 2021. The act came into effect in 2021. Then what they did was they gave us a grace period. So 2021, they were like, okay,
during which we are supposed to do what?
During which you are supposed to get your ducks in order and get your, comply. Put those processes, look at your policies, look at your contracts, train your staff. You were supposed to comply. So from 2021 until now, you were supposed to at least have put processes in place so that you're compliant.
Tell me about these endless requests for KYCs. Are they part of the act? I mean, we've been asked to supply the same information year after year, information among everything, and it's like, are they destroying the same information every year? What's going on?
So the thing is, number one, legislation does not act in a vacuum. There's other legislation that speaks to it, right? So the Data Protection Act knows that there's other legislation. So when I was talking about retention, then you have your FIA, your Financial Intelligence Act, that says you need to conduct those KYC for anti-money laundering purposes, and to vet and to make sure that people are not stealing money or bringing in money into a country or into a company using illicit crimes. So KYC is there to do that. It basically vets. It's vetting you. But the problem now is probably the system and how they store your data, because it means that they lose your data. The Data Protection Act says you need to store and secure data properly so that this doesn't occur. So but they
do it every year regardless. But I gave you the same information 12 months ago. They say, no, if you don't do this, then your account is frozen or something.
If their reason is they're updating your data and they're making sure that your data is still up to date and accurate,
they keep asking for the same thing.
Then they need to look at their processes as well. They need to look at their processes as well and see.
Can I object maybe under the Data Protection Act and say, This is abuse. You keep
But then
asking for the same thing.
But then they can also go to the Data Protection Act and say, but we're just making sure that your information is still accurate and it's still complete and it's up to date. Because that's what the Data Protection says. The Data Protection Act says that information, to maintain its integrity, it should always be up to date, complete and correct. So they could also say, but we're trying to satisfy this because within a couple of months your information could change.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you think is the biggest surprise that is hidden in that act? Or in your experience, in your interaction with the public, where was there the biggest shock element?
I think the biggest shock element from a business side is the fact that individuals can request to see their information and the type of information that they hold. So that was the biggest element, because let's face it.
Is that from the corporates?
That's from the corporates.
They were surprised.
They were surprised because there are some corporates and even state-owned entities where I have requested information just to see what they have. I've requested information and they have said no, that's their property now. I am not allowed to ask for that information. So I think that was the biggest surprise that
So then you'd refer to a provision of the act.
Yes, then I would say, but I am, and then they'll still refuse, but because it wasn't enforced then, they could get away with it. But now that it's enforced, then they know that, okay, now we can't get away with it. So that was the biggest surprise for them, because they felt like as soon as we have your information, it is our property. You know, why would you want it back? So, and then I think from individuals, I think knowing that they have rights when insofar as it comes to
So in
this.
terms of practical application of that, you apply for a loan, you give them all this information, and then they decline the loan. You are entitled to demand all that information back in terms of the act.
In terms of the act, yes, you are entitled to demand that information that you had given them. You are entitled.
They will
to
say,
do that.
no, it's in our archives. We're not going to give it back.
They're supposed to give you the copy of that information. If it's in their archives, they can retrieve it and give you a copy. They are mandated by the act to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless they have a legitimate reason not to do that, then yes. But if they don't have a legitimate reason, if they can rely on some sort of legislation, if they can rely on, maybe it's in the public interest that they do not share that copy, or it's in some sort of interest where they can't and it's a legitimate one, then yes.
Wow. Can you summarize the principal tasks of a data protection practitioner such as yourself? What do you say are the main things that you do on an average day or an average week?
Well, the main things is just trying to make sure that entities are compliant. Number one, training entities as well when it comes to the Data Protection Act, training them on what it is, what their responsibilities are, what their duties are, vetting their policies, their internal policies, to see do they align with the Act, do you in fact have policies that speak to data protection, do you have policies...
You're talking about an audit of sorts.
Doing an audit, auditing their policies, their internal processes, their contracts, auditing their systems, looking at
Does
their
that require
IT.
you moving into the offices for some
You
time?
physically have to, and you have to see and watch their behavior and see what they do with their data, how they're collecting their data, doing an audit of that. And it's
to see if there's compliance.
To see if there's compliance. And it's also a continuous exercise. It's not a once-off thing. It's a continuous exercise where you're monitoring and seeing, are they still doing this? Are they implementing these systems?
What else?
And also just public awareness when it comes to individuals as well. Public awareness when it comes to civic society, when it comes to media as well, what their role is in data protection, what it means, how they become responsible journalists, and just demystifying what the Data Protection Act is. Because some people are like, especially journalists, think that data protection is about stifling them and just preventing them from actually doing their work. So it's just public awareness, looking at contracts, assisting organizations also to be compliant, and assisting the public as well to know what their rights are.
How do you make money from all that? Do you bill for all that time, or how does it work? Because you're talking about public education.
Yes. So you've got the public side, because you do need the public education side, and then you've got the corporate side where you're going to entities, basically doing a whole compliance audit and looking at
That's
their policies.
work. That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work.
For which you're entitled to bill.
Yes.
So are you one of the few practitioners in the country, if not the only one?
Oh, definitely not the only one. So there are quite a few of us now. I mean, now it's a thing. It's when things become very fashionable, a lot of people take interest in it, and so there are quite a few of us. When it started off, there were very few, like I could count them in one hand. So now there are quite a few of us that are in this space and that are really doing well in this space, and I think that the pie is big enough for us. Yeah.
Now, to an average CEO, what are the duties and obligations imposed on them by the Act or by the new regulatory environment?
I think as a CEO, again, listen, you are the custodian of good corporate governance. Your buy-in is the most important thing, because it starts at the top. If you don't buy in, and if you don't act, and if you don't adhere to the legislation, you don't expect your staff to do that. And also, the regulator will probably come for you, because you are the boss. You are the one that stamps and authorizes and implements policies. You are the one that says, these are the policies that we're implementing. This is what we're doing.
So what do you do to comply then? What specifically do you need to comply?
Make sure that you, first of all, start with training. Start with training your staff. Start auditing your processes. Look at your processes. What data are you collecting? How long are you collecting it for? What legislation does it speak to? If you're collecting your board's information, look at the Companies Act. How long does it say you need to retain it for? If you are collecting information because of KYC and you're a financial institution, how long are you retaining it for? Look at the Financial Intelligence Act, and then as an employer as well, if an employee is no longer in your employ, you have their information. Why do you have it indefinitely? Look at the Employment Act. So you have a duty to also look at legislation that says keep information for this long. You have a duty to audit what information are you keeping. Is it sensitive, or is it just normal personal information?
Yeah, that's very interesting. As a practitioner, there's always been a requirement for lawyers to retain files, either 5 years or 7 years. And there's always been a challenge what happens after those 7 years. Does the Act clarify the situation? When you've ceased acting for a client, how long should the file remain protected?
So the Act says that, after you've retained it for as long as lawfully or legally possible,
which is?
It depends on the legislation. Like I said, if the information is pertaining to your FIA, or it's pertaining to tax, you're looking at that legislation, because different legislation would say...
Because you'd normally have finished with that client.
Yeah, if you're finished with that client, then it's either one, you contact that client to say, do you want copies of your information? Or if you don't want copies of your information, we delete your information, and you make sure that you delete it. So that says you can delete that information. Just inform your client that you deleted the information.
Are you not required to keep it for a certain length of time?
No, unless there's a legislation that requires you to.
Yeah. I think it's more from common law.
So So even with attorneys, I mean, we also have to adhere to FIA. So FIA will say 20 years, then you can still keep it for 20 years.
It's too long.
That is long. Keep it for 20.
Space.
Just make sure that you're storing it. That's why we use. I mean, lawyers don't like to use cloud services, but if we could use cloud services, that makes it easier for us to do it instead of keeping it at a physical location.
Yeah, I find this very interesting. But you do say there are myths and misconceptions. Can you demystify some myths and misconceptions for us?
Okay. I think the myths is, for business, is people want to control how businesses do things. It's not about controlling how businesses do things. It's not saying you're not allowed to be innovative, you're not allowed to collect information. It's not saying that you are allowed to collect information. Just do it in a lawful manner within the act. And I think one of them as well is, so every single time we need consent from someone. That is not true. The act is not saying every single time you need information, you need consent. It says there are different legal bases where you can ask for, one, you can ask for consent, or if you don't need to ask for consent, if there's a contractual obligation, you don't need to ask for consent. If a regulator or you are required by law, then you don't have to ask for consent. So businesses are always saying, it's going to be so administrative, so every single time we want to do something, we have to ask for consent. No. There are other reasons or there are other ways.
That's a very good point, because I was talking to a previous guest about how over-regulated we are in Botswana. Isn't that just another pile of example of over-regulation this is?
I don't think so, because it's really trying to manage how we use data. It's really trying to preserve integrity ya Botswana, because it's saying, I don't want my personal information as Lebogang, my medical records, to be on social media. And it's about that privacy. It's not over-regulation. This act has always been there. Like I'm saying, the right to privacy has always been there. It's just saying, let's just respect other people's...
It's codifying something.
Yeah, it's codified. Let's protect other people's privacy. Let's have something that we don't have to share. Let's have Sipiri as Botswana and not have things that are being shared on social media, on WhatsApp groups. That's all it's saying. It's saying, let's just manage how we treat people's personal things.
And of course, you mentioned the commissioner. What is the role of the commissioner in the infrastructure of the Data Protection Act?
So that's the custodian, that's the person that oversees and makes sure that this act is adhered to, enforces the act, and their duty is also to do the public awareness. They're supposed to be doing road shows, public awareness, so that Botswana are aware of this legislation.
Which means there's a physical secretariat and a physical commissioner and a set of bureaucrats having to do with this act.
Yes, there is somebody
what is the public authority?
So in most countries, a regulator such as this is not under the state. It's an independent body. It's an independent body so that they are able to actually do their work independently and not be affected or conflicted, right? So in this instance, our
in Botswana,
in Botswana, ours is a public servant. Ours is under the state, and is not. We are told that they are a public body, but they are
under the state president.
Yes.
How does that work practically?
That is an issue that is a very contentious one. And you know what, I think maybe it's something, because since we're learning, maybe it's something that would be looked into, because I do remember the president talking about how, regulators and such bodies like this should really be independent bodies, so that there is no conflict of interest.
So who is the current commissioner?
Mogobe is the current commissioner.
But she's based in the office of the president.
She is based in the office of the president. And then they also have another office at the finance house. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the office of the president has additional offices there.
Yes, so that's where they are.
Now, has there been any interesting litigation that has emerged since the act was provisionally approved?
Unfortunately, not yet. Not yet, because this is new. This is new, and like I said, there was a grace period, right? So with that grace period, what that meant was, we were given, or organizations were given, an opportunity where even if they were in breach, they really couldn't be fined, because they were just given that time to sort themselves out. So we will only see any litigation probably now But I wouldn't say now, like in the next year, maybe in the next 2 years, because also, listen, the commissioner is also new, the commission is new, and they're also
learning.
trying to, they're also learning, they're also trying to find their feet, and they're also trying to make sure that when they do enforce this legislation, they also have some teeth, and they also have some resources and backing. So I
Okay.
think maybe in the next 2 years we'll see something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, in jurisdictions where this has been going on, such as South Africa, what has emerged? What are the learnings? Has the either in the courts or maybe in the public administration space? By that I mean quasi-judicial. Has anything emerged?
I think the good thing about SA that we can also learn from is that the people, the perpetrators of the act, is the state. So we've seen a lot of legislation when it comes to the state. Ministry of Education.
You mean litigation or
Litigation, yeah. So Ministry of Education. We've seen even the Minister of Justice as well, and also the Ministry of Correctional Services.
What happened?
So, in the case of the Ministry of Correctional Services, this was the South African police. There was a case, the victims were gang raped, and it was supposed to be, obviously, it's a sensitive issue. So, what happened is that the police that were investigating this matter decided to open a WhatsApp group. And in that WhatsApp group, they decided that they're going to talk about and discuss this matter and share the pictures of these victims. Lo and behold, somebody intercepted that WhatsApp group. That somebody was one of the perpetrators. And then they actually threatened the victim because they had information of where that victim lives and the numbers of that victim. So they were found to be, the regulator found them to be in breach because they said that you were negligent in how you acted. You were not supposed to open a WhatsApp group with a very sensitive matter where you knew that in the age of cyber criminals and cyber attacks, somebody will have access. So they were fined a good 5 million rands.
Fine in the state.
Yep.
Didn't they appeal?
No, because they were found.
At fault,
They were at fault. They were not
and
supposed to do that.
There was no prospects of
There
success.
were no prospects of success. Even with the Ministry of Justice, same thing happened. Their system was hacked. And it was found that their system was over 10 years old and that they were told and they were advised to update their IT system. It was hacked, it was intercepted. Information was leaked and information was made public on social media pages about all the cases, the pending cases, not even cases that were pending cases, people that were being investigated. So
And
this
the
was
fault
sensitive
lied
with the ministry because they were negligent in not updating their IT system.
What sort of fines did they get? How
They
much?
were also 5 million rand. So they were also 5 million rand. And then
So almost like the state is just taking money from the left pocket to the right.
No, but
the fine goes to the state again.
But then no. But then remember, in South Africa, it's an independent body, so it's not regulated by the state.
I see.
Yeah, it's it's an all
No, but the
independent
money
body.
ends up in the same coffers, ultimately. But
Well, we hope not.
yeah.
Yes.
So, as a result of these cases, how have they beefed their systems up in South Africa?
So I think the reason why this was happening was because maybe the state felt as if they were untouchable. So I think it's a lesson here for us to say you're not above the law, and that also our state-owned entities should adhere and should comply because it starts there first for other people to follow. So I think in South Africa what happened was because they saw that the regulator actually has teeth, and that was a good example to show that we're not going after private entities, we're also going after everybody. So for it to show and demonstrate that it had teeth, it had to start in its own backyard and ensure that it's not afraid. And state-owned entities now are starting to take data protection and data privacy seriously. They're starting to stop the old ways of being conservative when it comes to how they secure data. They are now using technology to make sure that their data is secure. They're making sure that they also invest in technology, that they also invest in training.
Okay. Speaking of teeth, what specific teeth does our act have?
It's all about the person or the body. You know, legislation is always great it's always written brilliantly. It always looks like it's got teeth because you look at the penalties and you look at the administrative fines and you see the maximum being 50 billion pula. But
50 million?
50 million.
For doing what?
50 million. For breaching. For breaching.
Persistent breach.
Persistent breaching. So it's not going to say once you breach it, then you're already fined.
How does it get to 50 million?
So it's mirrored under the European General Data Protection Regulation. When you look at that act and you look at the Botswana one, they're exactly the same, even when it comes to penalties. It's a copy and paste because
there it's 50 million euros. Yeah, it's 50 million pula.
Yes. So because apparently the GDPR is the golden standard when it comes to data protection.
What's
and
that?
Botswana wanted also to have the golden standard here and to make sure that if they're going to be doing business with European countries and they're going to be doing business outside of Botswana, they have the golden standard and they can do business because then people will have trust in that in their legislation.
Whew.
But
like I said, what other teeth is there? The 50 million has shaken me a bit.
The teeth is also in the enforcement. If the regulator does not enforce and the regulator does not make an example and does not show that actually this act should be taken seriously, then it's just an act. Then that 50 billion is just there for show. So it's also up to the regulator to then say, we're enforcing this. Even if it's not 50 million, maybe it could be 10 million pula, maybe it could be 1 million pula, but we are showing that we take it seriously when you breach data. And Ghana breaching data is anything from losing a memory stick that has information. That is also breach. If you lose a memory stick and you are negligent, breach is also if you have someone's personal information laying here and I'm looking at it and you've got people's names and you've got people's bank account details on your desk. That is also breach because I viewed it, I saw it, and I can actually, by memory, I can probably share it and tell people about it. So that is also breach. And you also have an obligation to say, oh, by the way, I lost my laptop or I lost a memory stick that has information. I need to report it. And then you need to see, how do we mitigate that?
Speaking of mitigation, can insurance help mitigate the risk in any way?
So insurance companies are jumping into this. So that's what they're doing. They're doing your cybersecurity insurance to make sure that, in instances like this, because now there's the whole Data Protection Act, that companies can also cover themselves in instances like these.
Oh, okay. So it's already happening.
It's already happening. Already happening. I know a couple of insurance companies that have actually started this service offering as well.
Are the premiums heavy?
They're starting low. I mean, you know how insurance companies are. When it's a new product, it's low. And then until when there's demand, then it starts getting higher.
How does it look like? Give us an idea.
To be honest, I haven't really paid much attention to it. I mean, the one that I was looking at, they really started... It was a reasonable amount, but like I said, I didn't really pay much attention to it, but I was just hearing them talking about it, and I just felt like this just sounds reasonable enough, and if it starts there, I guess everybody else is going to start at that footing.
All right. You talked of us wanting to be the gold standard, but is there a country or a jurisdiction that, in terms of, I think gold standard is the correct question, that we look up to as the ideal?
I think personally for me, and maybe I'm being biased, would be South Africa. People have spoken about Kenya, but it will be South Africa because I'm looking at it holistically also in terms of what the regulator is doing there, in terms of the way they're raising awareness, in terms of the way, and not just awareness like with individuals and going to rural areas, but also awareness when it comes to going to entities and businesses as well, to say this is our expectations, this is what we want, in terms of also issuing directives to give guidelines for companies, so companies know what's expected of us, so that to avoid the hefty fines. The golden standard in terms of also not being afraid to show its teeth, not caring that this could be, these are police officers or this is the justice system, these are our colleagues. No, them actually showing that enforcement starts with you and this is what you need to do. So they're the golden standards there in terms of they're doing both the work. They are going out there to raise awareness, and because they're doing the work, then they also have the right to say, but we're doing the work, so you should be compliant. We're giving you directives. Our website is informative. We've got forms, we've got guidelines, we've got templates for you, we've got everything. They've basically given you and handed you every single thing that you need in terms of compliance, and it's up to you to decide not to comply. So for me, I would say they are the gold standard. And maybe the good thing and why they're the gold standard is because they didn't immediately enact the legislation. They did it in incrementally and section by section, so that they also allow themselves to learn as regulators.
Wow. And you mentioned Kenya.
Yes.
Are they number 2, sort of?
Kenya are also number 2. Again, the same reason, how they also equipping businesses, equipping individuals with tools to know what their rights are and also to know what they need. How they also going out there and setting up mini regulatory offices in your rural areas to make sure that even people in the rural areas have access to this information and know what their rights are.
Is this thing being driven or dealt with at the regional level? By that I mean SADC, or even at AU level, or at any kind of continental level?
So we've got the AU also talking about, right now it's already talking about AI governance in Africa. And now that most countries in Africa have adopted data protection legislation, then we need to set a standard for African countries in terms of AI, because it can't be one size fits all. And then from there, each country will then adopt and localize it. So already that has been conversations, even with data protection legislation. It had started at AAU level. It had started there because we were saying we cannot do a one size fits all and use Europe as an example. As much as they're the golden standard, we need to also localize it. But I guess, every country has the right to make their own decision when it comes to what their law should look like.
Now let me ask you about the yourself as a brand.
Yes.
You're obviously a partner in a very prominent law firm. How does it look like when you project into the future? What future unfolds, not just in the data protection area, but just as a practice and as a partner going forward? You could give us in terms of medium, long, and short term,
Yeah. I think for me, maybe let's start with the long term first, and then I'll, I think for me, the long term vision and the goal, because I've always, at first I wanted to really be a public servant or a human rights lawyer at first. This was years ago. And this is also why I went to SA. I wanted to do corporate commercial, but at the same time, I was also at the Constitutional Court. I really was interested in human rights law as well. And when I started doing data protection, I was like, maybe I'll be the youngest commissioner, maybe I'll do this and drive this data protection animal, or be an AI commissioner in Africa or in Botswana. So for me, I've always wanted to do something that has to do with serving the public. Commercial, corporate, it just happened to me. So it's always been the 10-year vision really would be something in the public service. I've always wanted to do that. If I retire, I hope I retire doing that and serving and being in that practice. There was a time, for some reason, I wanted to be also a chief justice, but but if I can do the commissioner role, then that would be good.
Wow.
And then I think short to medium would really be to build the data protection department in my department and in my field, and to grow it. and to also just be known as the go-to data protection specialist. In that area, if not the go-to, one of the best, and somebody who is practical, and somebody who actually puts in an effort, because sometimes I think a lot of us are good with branding ourselves and not delivering. So I want to be somebody who, maybe I'm good with branding, but I'm also good with delivering, and people can say, okay, she helped us do this, she's the one.
Yeah. You mentioned how you've been engaging on social media and writing on this subject. Is there any particular post that you can share, or at least the key points from which you shared, which provoked the loudest and the biggest amount of response?
Gosh, they're gonna dig this up, but nothing really disappears in social media. I think the biggest one was when I was being very vocal about the role of the commissioner, and if the commissioner is really independent, and if we're really gonna see if they've got teeth, because I did not believe in a commissioner being housed next to the president, because I was like, then what are we going to see from that? What is going to be their role? We need an independent commissioner. And that was the one that gained a lot, because then people would be calling me from the side saying, are you serious? You want to say that? Do you really? You're talking about data protection, and there are times when you want to call the commission's office, but you're busy saying, are they going to have teeth? So I think that was the biggest one, when I was talking about, will there be autonomy? Will there be independence when it comes to the regulator? Which is a fair question that nobody wants to ask. And I kept saying, I really do think the act should be looked at in terms of giving such a person like that, who deals with data and access to information, because we're talking about access to information. It shouldn't be controlled by the state who accesses that information. It should be an independent body. So the pushback
was coming from the state?
The pushback, I feel like the pushback was coming from the state. Yes. Because then the Data Protection Commission is also going to be dealing with access to information. As a Motswana, you're probably, or as a journalist, you're going to want to see, what information can we access? We want to access information about state funding. We want to access information about the political party. Where do they get money? So if that person is sitting next to the ruling government, do you really think you're going to get the information you want?
Yeah. And is data protection somehow related to the Freedom of Information Act? Because journalists are always talking about that one.
Absolutely. So what they did was, now there's a new act, the Access to Information Act. And really, you got...
Is it out?
It is out. It is out. And this is the other thing with...
When was it?
This is as soon as the bill, when they did the data protection bill, this was last year October. That's when it came out. And this is the thing about our country, is that it's so hard to access information that people don't even know about new legislation as well. So it is out, and this is something that journalists had been pushing for so many years, because they had said, we want accountability, and we want to know what happens with our funds, or what happens with our information. So it is out, and this is, and
so it's not just data. It's not access to information. It's Access to Information Act, not just freedom of information.
It's access to information.
It gives you guidelines of how to get to that information.
It facilitates that freedom to information.
So journalists were celebrating, were they?
They were celebrating, but I mean, some don't even know that it's out. It was only
some me, I wasn't sure.
Some don't even know, but it is there, and I really do think that people should read it as well, to make sure, and especially journalists, because they're the ones that actually disseminate information.
So you can just make a request for important information.
For important information that's within the public interest. So within the public interest, and that's why I'm saying, then we also need to talk about the independence of the person who sits with this legislation, because they're the ones that are going to decide, is it within the public interest? So we need somebody who's independent and who can say it is within the public interest.
Wow, that's very interesting. Now, speaking for yourself, Madam, are there any criticisms that you have for the infrastructure, never mind the act, just the infrastructure, maybe something that you'd have touched on in your in your postings and posts?
Infrastructure meaning?
The data protection infrastructure.
I think the only thing that is an issue for me is when we're talking about this data protection and securing data. We already have a problem in Botswana about system down. So we need to also address those issues, because when the system is down, what's happening to data? Where is it? Where is it sitting when the system is down? And when you're kept, when they keep telling you come back later, come back tomorrow. So we need to know, because that's why Botswana are resilient to so many things. That's why Botswana don't want this digital transformation, because they're saying, if I'm doing this digital transformation and then the system is down, what's happening to my information? You know, we've been talking about e-gov for the longest time, but Botswana don't trust government because we're not sure of the infrastructure. We're not sure. How can we trust you?
So what can be done about that?
We need to government needs to gain our trust by fixing the infrastructure. We need to stop this system is down thing and phenomenal, which has now become normal, and we laugh about it. So we can only, once government sorts that out, then we can start talking about digital transformation. Then Botswana can really trust government when it comes to digitization.
So, as a parting shot, what can someone having listened to this conversation do? In other words, what is the call to action? What must as we've heard all this, now what?
Yeah, be proactive as well. Be proactive. Don't wait for government or don't wait for people to feed you information. Look for that information so that you also know what your rights are, so that you know what you're entitled to, so you know what you can demand as a Motswana, and also as businesses, so you know what to demand as well. So I think it's also up to us to make sure that we know what our rights are, so that we know what to demand.
So you avoid paying 50 million.
So you avoid paying 50 billion. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a
and
scary
make
figure.
those people, and those people you should also say to the state, especially because private entities are up in arms, also says to the state, it starts with you. You know, you demonstrate, you show us. Because, I mean, if you're looking at state entities as well, when it comes to compliance,
it's very minimal.
Very minimal.
You're working in that space as well.
I'm working in that space as well, to say to them, you know what, let's take care of your backyard as well, so that when you stand up there and say, you know, here's this legislation, let's comply, you've also complied as well.
Okay. All right. Now it's time for you to hit me with a question.
Sure. I knew this was coming.
Yes, you were forewarned.
Yeah, I was. I think for me, from the top of my head, I'm not gonna say what is the most challenging or the most upsetting thing when you're looking at young people, especially when it comes to maybe the ones that don't take opportunities, or the ones that do take opportunities and they just not the best version of themselves.
Yeah. I don't know whether I can say it's upsetting, but it's certainly a concern, because my generation were thrown into the deep end. We enjoyed hardship when exposed to difficult circumstances. In a way, we have over-cuddled our young people. In a way, we have created a culture of entitlement, intentionally or unintentionally. And it's a concern for me. I'm just trying to think if there's a way we can reverse that, because it has done a lot of damage. Every time our children complain about something, we want to fix it. So I'm upset that I'm also a culprit when it comes to that, when it comes to the way I brought up my children. But I console myself by saying they didn't turn out too badly. But sometimes I think that they could have been a lot further if they've had it rough a bit. And I sometimes I wonder whether it's allowed for a parent to create artificial hardship for their children for the purpose of making them tougher.
Yeah.
And if it were possible or practical, it's something I would be espousing. Create artificial hardship. Make it tough for your children to get the perks and the benefits. Let tie it up to something, to an effort. So that would be the only thing that I would complain about.
Okay.
I hope I've answered your question.
No, you have.
Yeah.
You
right.
have.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. We've wrapped up our conversation. So the last thing now is for you to look at that camera and to share one final message relating to the act or anything to do with what we discussed.
Okay. I think my final message, I keep repeating this. I think that it's up to us. It's our responsibility to make sure that we do the work, we do the research, we know what our rights are and what our responsibilities are, so that we hold those to account.
Okay, all right. Share all your contact information, including where they can access you, where they can come and consult, perhaps.
I'm just on LinkedIn. I did a social media detox and I haven't been back for 5 years now, so I'm only on LinkedIn. It's at Lebogang George.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And where do they find the firm? And are you available on WhatsApp for them if they want to consult?
If they want to consult, I'll give my email address. My email address is lebogang@aja.co.bw.
And of course, Akil Janabai.
Akil Janabai and Associates, in association with McKee Law Firm, just across the road from here.
Yeah, so
Yes,
CBD. Okay, next to Shell.
Yes.
Shell filling station. Thank you very much. You've done a good job.
Thank you so much.